So today we have Ryan Dusick, who is the former drummer of Maroon 5, but also now a therapist, a coach, a speaker, and he also has a podcast called Harder to Breathe and a memoir called Harder to Breathe as well. So I am super excited to have you here, Ryan. Welcome to the Check Your Head podcast.
Thank you so much. Good to be here.
Well, I'm going to start off sharing a story about Ryan. It was so long ago. I was at the Roxy, and Michelle Branch, I had done a feature article on her, and Maroon 5 was opening for Michelle Branch. So after the show, I struck up a conversation with you, Ryan, really quick. And you said, "Oh, yeah, I'm going back to UCLA and finishing my college degree." And I said to you, "Wow, that's great. That's exciting." But honestly, in my head, I was thinking, "Oh gosh, songs from Jane or songs about Jane." My apologies. Songs about Jane was steadily climbing up the charts, right? It was that slow build with that album, such a great album. And I thought to myself, gosh, why would he want to stop now? But we are going to talk with you as a musician to share your story. But today we're going to start talking about the Jewel interview as a therapist.
Yeah.
One thing that really stuck out to me in her interview was that she was studying about nature versus nurture. And she questioned if I received bad nurture because she was abused during her childhood, would it affect my nature? And I wanted to start by asking you, how can a therapist help to break the cycle of abuse for a client?
Well, it's a challenge depending on how much trauma someone has experienced and at what stage of their life. Trauma that is formative, in your developmental years certainly has a more insidious and long-lasting effect. Not that having a traumatic event in adulthood doesn't affect you to a great degree, but when you haven't been given the sort of tools for coping or the ways to establish a secure way of being in your body and in your mind from birth or from a very early age, you're fighting against, a lot of deeply ingrained sort of conditioned behavior, which is all nurture. I mean, that's the good news, right? I mean, there's the age old debate. Is it nature or nurture? I think we all have our nature, and you could call it genetic or you could call it just predisposition, but our environment, and when I say environment, I don't just mean things that happen to you when you're 5. And your environment includes things like being in utero and what your mother was consuming and those sort of things, everything that affects the ways that those genes are expressed. That starts from day one. And so as you are an adult and you have maybe a lifetime of trauma or abuse in your childhood that affected your development, it's daunting, but it's not impossible to overcome or to rewire those circuits because it is a conditioned experience of trauma. It's in your nervous system, it's in your body, it's in your mind. But once you change your relationship with yourself, which starts with self-compassion, understanding this wasn't my fault, I was an innocent victim of abuse, and forgiving yourself for the ways in which you may be taking that responsibility on. A lot of times we experience shame as a result of abuse and trauma, which for an objective person doesn't make a whole lot of sense because why would somebody whose fault it wasn't feel shame for that thing? But it's a natural outgrowth because as a child, we don't know how to process these things. We internalize them as being our fault. And so beginning with that self-compassion, which develops into self-love and self-awareness, self-understanding, we begin to give ourselves the kind of love and care that maybe we weren't given as a child by our caregivers. And that's the work of a therapist to a certain degree, is to be that unconditional giving unconditional positive regard or even love to a client is the way that they learn how to do that for themselves, right? So that's the starting point. But then it's also just unwiring those conditioned responses. We may have learned, unhealthy ways of coping, ways of trying to deal with the pain of that and the shame of that. And so you have to develop new skills to replace those. The best way to unlearn an old behavior is to learn a new behavior. So instead of the ways that we might be self-destructive or coping in a way that actually makes things worse in the long run, we learn ways that are going to foster that self-compassion, foster that self-love, foster calm and relaxation, and tools for living a life that's going to be healthier in the long run and conducive to the healing that's important to overcome those traumas.
Okay. You said a lot there that I'm really kind of fascinated about. One thing was healthy ways to express the emotions that we have. We all know about addictions, which is kind of something that, people grab onto to kind of cope with those feelings. And then there are healthy ways to deal with them. I think with Jewel, she found journaling to be something that was helpful for her. I'm sure songwriting was probably something a lot of musicians, vent that way, feel much more comfortable venting through songwriting and lyrics versus, let's say, one-on-one conversations. So what do you do if you find that somebody is using, let's say, something dangerous, and in Joel's case, it was shoplifting. What do you suggest on how, as far as changing those behaviors and focusing it on something that's positive?
Well, again, these are conditioned responses to pain, right? These are ways that we try to cope. And of course, if you weren't given the skill set to cope with pain in a productive way, and you find something that alleviates the pain immediately, you're going to do that again, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's taking a drink of alcohol or it's a behavior like shoplifting or sexual behaviors that feel good in the moment and may get you out of the experience of that shame or vulnerability or pain, you're going to identify that as a way to cope. And then you do that more and more, and it becomes a conditioned response. Every time you feel the pain, you think about doing that thing. You have an urge to do that thing. So again, it's about unconditioning that response by conditioning a new response. Mm-hmm. And that's hard to do. That's really hard to do. That's why addiction can be such a difficult thing to overcome, because whenever we have that pain, we immediately go to that thing that we think is going to solve the problem. We forget that the thing that's solving the problem is actually causing more problems for us in the long run, because in the moment, when it's overwhelming, when you have this feeling that you feel like you can't deal with, you want something that's going to get rid of it immediately. So it takes time. It's just like unlearning any habit and starting a new habit. It's repetition and reinstating that thing over and over and over again until it becomes the new conditioned response. That's sort of the cognitive behavioral approach to it, is like when you have that feeling, when you have the stimulus that creates that discomfort, when you have that thing that causes the pain, instead of going right to the old solution, replacing that with something that's going to be more healthy and productive. That may be meditation, that might be journaling, that might be going for a hike, that might be calling a friend, that might be going to an AA meeting. Whatever it is that helps you in that moment get to the next moment so that that craving passes. And if you do that enough over a matter of weeks and months, eventually, just like the original conditioned response, that thing becomes the conditioned response to the pain. But concurrently, I wish it were that simple for everyone, but concurrently, a lot of other things kind of need to be happening, which is why it's so difficult. The importance of community support, having the feeling that you're not alone in this, working on the shame, because these are unconscious things that happen. It's not all just cognitive, right? So that's why therapy can be so important and helpful, is working through the source of the pain and understanding your relationship to it. giving yourself that self-compassion, not just dealing with the behavioral aspect of it and the cognitive aspect of it, but the deep rooted, unconscious, emotional, and somatic elements of it. How you experience it in your body, how you deal with those feelings in your body, how you sit with those feelings and process them. That's what therapy is for. That's what meditation is for. That's what, getting a better understanding and then learning new skills to cope. That's why those things all are important. You have to look at it sort of holistically. Every element is a part of the experience. The thoughts, the feelings, the behaviors, the relationships, our patterns in the way that we go about living our lives.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people look at therapy or counseling as somebody talking and the other person listening.
Right.
And I think that we need to look at therapy more as you are the leader with all these tools, and you can guide us to learn different skills so that we can live better lives, healthier lives. And you being a musician, you can really speak to a lot of musicians who are having so many issues and they don't know what to do. They don't know where to turn. I wanted to talk about actually something that goes before all of this learning, which is being mindful. Joel was talking about being disassociated from her feelings.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, it sort of explains, let's say, being mindful versus being on autopilot. And I find a lot of people are on autopilot because of their upbringing or what they've seen, and they just automatically do what they know instead of consciously thinking, is there a better way? What do you think about, how would you explain being dissociated from your feelings?
Mm-hmm. Well, dissociation is a clinical term that refers to the experience of being disconnected either from yourself or from your surroundings. It's something that we all experience in one way or another at different points in our life. And it's on a spectrum from relatively mild and innocuous all the way up to, pretty severe disorder. I think that we can all relate to dissociation, for instance, as daydreaming, which is a way in which we might not be present, might not be connected to our surroundings. We might be just sort of fantasizing about something else in our mind. That's one way that we could be disconnected from our surroundings or from the experience of being in our bodies in the present. Most of us have had the experience at one point of driving, and you get to your destination and you think to yourself, I don't remember driving for the last 20 minutes, right? That's essentially dissociation. It shows that your body can go on autopilot and can function fine without your thoughts being connected, your perceptions being connected to what's going on and what it's the task that it's trying to complete. So that just shows you that we have the ability to be somewhere else in our mind, and our body still can react and respond to things in real time to what's going on. Now that's functional, right? That's a way in which we function well while dissociating. However, on the other end of the spectrum, it can lead to things like a dissociative fugue state, which you might remember from the show Breaking Bad. There was an episode in which he explained the reason why he had disappeared for a couple days because he was in a dissociative fugue state, which meant he had taken on a whole other identity. He had no memory of it whatsoever. He had done bad things or something while he was in that state. That's pretty rare, but we do hear about dissociative identity disorder, which is, a condition in which people create sort of alter egos, different parts of themselves that take over at different times. That's a way of escaping the pain of a trauma that was intolerable. So you just literally step into a whole other identity that's not feeling that pain, that's having a different experience completely. You learn that very early on because a child has a very active fantasy world in their mind. That's the way they cope with the world, by creating fantasies in their imagination. So if that becomes your coping style, then you're constantly looking for ways to escape the experience of being in your body or in your mind when something uncomfortable or overwhelming is happening. So there's a whole spectrum in between, and most of us, to a certain extent, can relate to the idea of checking out at certain times, or just being, as you said, on autopilot. So how does that relate to what Jewel is describing and what people are experiencing when they go into therapy? A lot of us are disconnected from our feelings. We may bury our feelings, we might compartmentalize them, we just don't really experience them fully because we at least perceive them to be too painful to deal with. So rather not deal with it, just kind of push them down, right? The other way in which a lot of people experience dissociation is disconnect from their bodies. You know, if you had physical or sexual trauma, your body might not be a safe place to exist. You know, to feel things deeply in your body is scary because it's connected to something scary and painful, or just confusing. You know, there might be good feelings that go along with that, and that's not tolerable because it brings up shame or other feelings that are really uncomfortable associated with that trauma. So whatever the experience may have been, whatever the pain that we're experiencing emotionally or psychologically, the work is growing the tolerance to sit with those feelings more presently, to actually experience our emotions and process them, to actually be present with our surroundings, if that's the issue, being disconnected from our surroundings, and to actually be present in our bodies and to feel that fully. Because whatever is occurring in this present moment, it's usually not as scary as what happened that created that disconnect in the first place, right? Mm-hmm. You might feel like there is a bad person in the room with you right now about to do something bad to you. That's rarely the case in the present tense. If it is, then the fact that you're experiencing fight or flight is probably a good thing. You need to get out of there. But the other 99% of the time, we're just connecting with that conditioned response, those feelings that came from a long time ago, to the present moment, and therefore perceiving the present moment as intolerable, when really it's not. Nothing is really that. There's no tiger in the room about to kill us. There's really just us sitting in the present moment with our breath, with, you know, the sun on our back. The experience can be a pleasant one if we're able to let in the feelings of what is actually happening in this moment. So mindfulness, it's a word that gets misused and misconstrued a lot, because I remember when I first heard it, I was an overthinker. And so being more mindful didn't sound like a good idea for me. It's like, I already think everything to death. I need more mindfulness. But it's kind of a misnomer, because really what we're describing is actually not mindlessness, but less influence of our own thoughts and emotions on what is happening. Just perceiving things as they are, accepting the present moment for what it is, learning to tolerate just the feeling of breathing and paying attention to our breath, learning to tolerate the fact that I'm sitting in a room. All that I hear is the sound of the air conditioner or the sound of cars driving by in the background. And that's it. That's all that's happening in this moment. And now I can tell and actually be present that that's all that's happening. There's no bad man in the room with me that's going to get me. So once it's a learned and developed skill, which some of us may be born with more than others. Some of us were given that skill because we had good role models in terms of being present and dealing with our emotions and processing things as they come up. But some of us never received that. And so it's just another thing to learn, another conditioned response. But it takes practice. It takes, if you wait until you're feeling really overwhelmed, you're having a panic attack, or you're feeling, intense shame, to try to then be mindful, it's a little late, right? Because you're overwhelmed and your resources are taxed. You're just going to reach for whatever is going to make that feeling go away right now. But if you practice it daily, for 10, 20 minutes, just mindful meditation, or just sitting with whatever you're doing, mindful eating, being present with your food. I do mindful stretching every morning. I just stretch and feel the what it feels like to be in my body, and feel my body limbering up, and listening to what's going on in the background around me, and just really fully sitting in the present moment and what it feels like to be in my body. You do that every morning, just as you're warming up into your day, you're going to be more present throughout your day the more you do it.